for joining me again this afternoon. You would have seen on Facebook that I set myself a little challenge. As of Tuesday, when I'd done my live, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to be doing with you this afternoon, and I was looking through all the bits and pieces that I had, and I'd got myself all confused. So I looked at all the products that Lisa is bringing onto her next show on Sunday for us. So that'd be Sunday the 27th. Lisa has the one-day special, and she has the inks coming up, which is release 3 of the matte blending inks. I can't wait for those. So really excited for them. But in the meantime, what I thought I'd do, I'd have a quick look through the other products that she's bringing on, and a lot of them are already released products. So they're old favourites that are coming back, that are really handy to have in your stash. So I thought what I'd do, I'd dig out the ones that I have, and it really includes some really old favourites. It's one of the original releases, which is the textured A6 stamp set here, which is an ultimate favourite. You'll see the stamps in a minute that I've used these a lot. But I thought I'd just dig out all the products that I do have, and I set myself a challenge to make something with them all. Now, when I posted that up, I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to make. So I had spent a few hours having a little panic. I wasn't brave enough to come on straight with you today and just work straight from scratch. So I have prepared something. So what you see here is I've created an easel card. It's an easel card with a slight difference. And I'll show you, you can probably see that, perhaps the eagle-eyed among you will see how that looks different already, but I'll show you that it's not the normal conventional easel card. It's just a tiny little twist to it, just makes it look a little bit different. So I've managed to use the majority of the products that are coming onto Lisa's show on Sunday. So if you are on the fence about any of them, or you wonder how any of them will fit into the products that you have already, then hopefully this can show you how that can do that. Now obviously I've used a stamped image on here. I've used that because this is what's coming on the show, but bear in mind that with the oval circles there are lots of stencils, floral stencils, that will fit within the die cut of the oval, so it doesn't have to be that you use a stamped image for this, so sort of bear that in mind. To start with, I'll show you the products in order that I've used them on the card. So one of the newer sets is the Nested Stitch Torn Die. So this is a really fabulous set. It fits perfectly to my favourite shaped cards, which are the square cards, and I'll just measure that. So that's just short of a 6-inch square card. The largest die on this, you can see here that I've used on the lay of the pink and the blue, is just short of that 6-inch, so it layers and mats and layers perfectly onto a 6-inch square card blank. So they'll be on the show. Next I've used, as well as the interference inks, but I'll come on to those in a bit, are the background stamps. Now these are a staple. Whenever I do any stamping, these pretty much figure in one way or another on most of my stamped projects too. Now unusually for me, I haven't used the text on this. I've actually used one of the other textures. The Mandala collection, which is something that I haven't used for ages. I loved it when it came out. That is on the lineup of the show. You may have it already, you may not, but I'll just show you the back of the card. I've actually used it as a background just to create myself the backing paper for this card. For this card I've used, apart from the coloured cardstock, which is the grey and the matte of the bubble oval there, everything else is white cardstock. So I've actually created my backing paper. So I haven't used any pre-printed backing paper, I've made it all. So that was really useful in that process. Obviously the stitched bubble ovals, one of the newer sets again, lovely set, and I've been using that a lot just recently on my lives. Then we have the Sugar and Spice collection. Again, you can tell by the packaging actually that this is one of the original sets that were released from the stamps. Really fun images. I've used the telephone here, and I've just created it into a happy birthday card, but you've got little sentiments on here also, which are perfect, great for catching up with friends. If you want to send a letter, sometimes it's just nice to send something personal and handwritten, isn't it? But I'm using a different image. I shall use the deck chair image today. And then last but not least, I've used this really useful set as well. It's the Build a Sentiment collection. So we have stamps and dies in this. You have the larger words, which you can stamp and die cut. And you'll see here, I've stamped the happy. And then you have smaller stamps without the dies that you can just cut out. So this is where the birthdays come from. So it gives you the chance to do Mother's Day, Father's Day, anniversary, Easter, lots of different things. You can never have too many of this type of sentiment. It's a really lovely font, and I've just used this and mounted it onto 3D foam, so that acts as the stopper for the card. So let me just tip that up that way. Easel cards are really hard to show you when you've got an overhead camera. I'm quite conscious if you put them down the way that they're meant to be, then obviously you can't see too much, and then if you hold it like this, it pops out. So hopefully you can see that okay. Oh, hi Tina. Hi Julie. Oh, it's lovely to have you all here. Okay, so I actually did manage to use all of the sets that I wanted to in the one card. So once I'd made that, I was happy and I felt confident that I could come on to do a live with you, and that I've actually completed the challenge that I set myself. I think it's a really nice way to start card making sometimes. Sometimes you can just be so overwhelmed with all the products that you've got. And it's much the same for us in the design team as well. We have lots of Lisa stuff, and I don't always know where to start to make a card, to be honest, especially when I've got to come to you and show you something. So it was really nice just to start off this way. Today actually I won't be using the Ultimate either. There'll be no stenciling involved at all. There'll be a lot of ink blending. So the inks that I've chosen to use today are the interference inks. Now the colours that I've used on this card, the two colours, are the Teal Twist, which is the blue on the top here, and the Fruit Salad Shimmer on the bottom. Now, obviously, by using these interference inks and blending, you've got that added bonus of having that mica come out. So when you twist this to the light, there are certain areas of it where I've actually added the ink to, a lot heavier, that you've got that interference mica, or the mica sheen coming through. So that's a really nice little bonus to the card as well. And these colours just go together. I wanted to use the interference inks to show you that you can actually blend with them and create the backgrounds with them, and you don't only have to use them through the stencils. Okay, so those are the two colours I used for this card. I'm actually going to swap and use two different colours for the next card. So I'm actually going to use the Lemon Candy and the Opal Blush. So we'll still go with the bluey theme, but we'll go lemony at the bottom this time round. This image was coloured with Copics. Now, when I colour an image, it takes me a long time, so that's not something that I'm necessarily confident in showing you how to do unless I was watercolouring with inks and doing it that way. So I've actually spent the time beforehand stamping the image out. So I've used Lisa's black ink. What's it called? It's the Cloud 9, the solid black ink. So this is a hybrid ink which enables you to stamp an image to be coloured with Copics or alcohol markers and watercolours as well. So I've pre-done this and I've coloured both of my images with Copics, the alcohol markers, saying that's pretty much what takes my time. And I don't always know how it's going to turn out. Sometimes I need to do it a second time. So this is the colourway that I should be working with this time round. So the card blank I'm using is my standard 6x6 square card blank. And on the front of the card, I've actually scored But if you've got the spine here, I've scored a vertical line exactly halfway down the side of the card or down the front of the card. And what we need to do is just to fold that and give that a good burnish with your bone folder. And make sure you do this sort of both ways, because that, I find that just helps the card open and just keep its shape a little longer. So I would fold it one way and just use the bone folder, then I'll fold it another way, and that just makes that fold just a little bit more flexible, I found. Now, when we create an easel card, normally we would have our card blank, we'd have our fold, and we'd actually create the easel card. So we've got a tent shape going on like this, okay? And do you know what? You can actually create this card that way as well. Either way would work, and you'd still get the same result at the end of the day. But what I've done this time around, instead of having the base of the easel card like this, I've actually taken this fold and put it back. So you've got a fold back card. I'm not even quite sure what that's called. This is my knowledge of shaped cards isn't quite as vast as Dawn's is. But basically the shape of the card now acts like this. And you put your easel image on the front of the card like so. So instead of using the base of the card to anchor onto a stopper on the base of the card blank, you're actually using the image this time around. So that just gives you, I think it just gives you a slightly different look, doesn't it? So let me just do that. That would be a traditional easel card. And the easel card that I've made today, let's turn that up on this side like this. So hopefully you can see. Let me wait for my camera to catch up. So this would be a traditional easel card. And the easel card that I'm making today looks like that. There we are. Can you see that side by side? Let me just wait for my camera to catch up with me so you can see the difference. As I say, you still create a lovely... Oh, Z fold, is it? Lorraine, thank you. I'm not very good. And do you know what? My mind goes blank when I'm chatting to you as well. I know these things when I'm sitting here thinking about it. So yeah, you can see the difference between the two easel shapes there, but you create the basic card blank in exactly the same way for both. So yeah, it's just nice to create something a little bit different, isn't it? Okay, so we have our card blank. Right, what I shall do first, I shall start creating the backgrounds and the Inky techniques for you. So I need to create two, so I need to get going. So what I've done is cut myself the largest layer from the nested torn squares. Okay. Again, if you're using a small, it's just something that you can easily scale down as well, because you're using nesting dies. You can scale this down to suit whichever card blank that you have. So I'm not using those two, move those out of the way. So to start with, I'm going to use the Opal blush. So I'm using my blending sponge. I've got my messy mat in the back today, so this is my tool of choice as opposed to the Ultimate. And I'm just basically going to use my blending tool to cover this nested torn square. Now, because of the challenge that I've set myself and I wanted to create my own background, this is why I'm inking these squares, and I've got control of the colour coordination. But there's absolutely nothing to say that if you have some nice design paper sitting there in your stash, instead of inking them, why not create or just die cut your design paper with the nesting squares instead? Again, this style of card is so versatile. If you want to give the inking a go, then, you know, brilliant. If you've got different styles of stamp that you want to put in the background, then you can do that as well, you know. But it'd be a really nice way to use your coordinating designer paper packs too, wouldn't it? Particularly perhaps even the modern florals that I used the other day of Lisa's, and I think it would make a stunning Christmas card as well. So as you can see, I'm just working my way around, and even though I'm using the interference inks, I'm working up really gently, and I'm blotting off first on my messy mat, then coming onto the side of my cardstock, and I'm using Lisa's super smooth cardstock for this, so I know that the blending sponge and the ink work so well onto this, and I'm just working my way around. And you can make this base colour as pale or as intense as you like. I think this is a perfect way to really show your style and your character when you ink like this, but build it up gently. Don't go on with the heaviest amount. If you want a darker card, don't go on with the heaviest amount straight away. Just build it up really gently. And you know what? You don't necessarily need to have a really smooth blend, because we're going to stamp in the background. We want to have that, I suppose, random sort of blended look. I mean, you can see there that isn't a perfectly smooth blend, but by the time I've finished with it with the textured stamps, that really won't matter. What I do want, however, though, is to have a darker background, a darker edge around the outside. And you can see here that where I'm working from my messy mat onto the cardstock, we're naturally getting that faux matted or matte and layered look. And I want to make the most of that by adding a lot more ink just around the outside. So that's a look that I really like. So I should just go around and make sure that's even all the way around. You can perhaps add a little bit more ink into the corners, like so. Now I've found that when I'm working with the interference inks like this and the sponges, as opposed to just dabbing the ink on, I do like to sort of swipe my sponge over the top of the ink pad. I find that that picks up a lot more ink, but evenly over the sponge, and I think that helps with giving you a nice smooth blend onto the cardstock as well. Okay, so we've got that there, and that's a really lovely colour. And actually doing this, you'll see the beauty of the colours, because that is all that is sitting on the cardstock there. Now, what I need to do, I'm going to swap to my stamps, and I do want to go for the textured look. I want to go for the distress look, so I'm using this little square one here, and you can see the state of my stamps. They've been well used. And using these interference inks will stain, it's a high chance that it will stain the stamp, but don't worry about that. As long as you just clean off the excess ink from the top of the stamp, you can still carry on to use that. Now, I'm not actually going to put this onto a stamping block, because the way that these stamps are made, you can see that they're sticky enough. They're actually sticking to my fingers, and I want to do that because I don't want to have a perfect stamped impression with this. It's not necessarily the idea of these stamps. So I'm using my fingers as the block, and that just gives me a little bit of flexibility. I'm going to stamp or ink that up, and I'm going to stamp off the majority of the ink onto the messy mat before stamping onto my cardstock. Okay, and then I'm going to carry on stamping on my cardstock until the ink has gone. What that is doing is just creating like a really distressed look in the background, but not forced. And you can see that just as I'm chatting, I'm just randomly stamping, and you can't actually see a huge amount of the image, because we're stamping tone on tone as well. It just gives a really subtle look into the background, especially as that ink dries. And hopefully, as you can see, that any imperfections I had in my blending have now been disguised behind the distressed look. Now this one's going a little bit heavier, which is absolutely fine because that's sitting in the corner. I damp a little bit off and just add a little bit more. And you just carry on building that up. I'm going to leave the centre free because I sort of like the halo look, as it were. But that is our first base or first layer for our card. Now I'm going to do exactly the same but with the other colour. But before I do that, move that out of the way, I am going to clean that off. Now remember, these inks are also water reactive, so if you wanted the faux bleached look as well, you can get yourself a really fine mist and spray that onto what you've just blended, then dab off and you've got like a really mottled effect. So that's a really nice technique as well, and I think I have shown you that in the past. So I'm going to do exactly the same now with the second colour, which is the lemon candy. So I should pick up my ink, quite a lot to start with, take it off onto the messy mat first and then just start blending. When I blend, I don't have the sponge flat onto the cardstock. Let's show you on this. I don't have the sponge flat like that. I always have it at an angle. I'd say about 45 degrees, but it sort of varies, but that's pretty much the angle that it works at. And because the sponge is flexible, when you put pressure on it, it sort of it still keeps the angle, but you're not getting the full surface. And I think by keeping it at an angle like this and using that flexibility of the sponge, allows you to get a smoother blend onto your paper. So that might just be something to bear in mind when you're applying your ink. Catherine, the sponges that I'm using are Lisa sponges. You'll find them under the tools section on Lisa's website. Now the tools that I'm using are my own tools. It's something that I've used for years. But these sponges, you can buy them as refill packs, just sponges on their own, but you can also buy them as in a pack with the tool. What I'm using is exactly the same as the tool here, just a different shape. They both have Velcro on the end for the blending sponges to catch onto. I made these a long time ago because I've always done lots of blending and lots of inking. It's my favourite thing to do, and I've always to save me getting mucky fingers doing this type of thing, I like to have a blending tool for each colour that I'm using. So that's the reason why that I use this, and I find this particular shape just easier for my hands to hold. But the blending sponges are exactly the same as, you know, it's exactly the same as what everybody will be using, and these are in fact Lisa's ones. So yes, keep your sponge at a 45 degree angle. That allows you to keep, it gives you that darker line on the edge of the cardstock, and it allows you to have that softer blend on the inside as well. It stops the, I'll show you on to a spare bit of card. If you were blending with the sponge flat, you'll get a lot more of these circle patterns into your ink, and they are a lot harder to blend out, and I think that's where people get a little bit frustrated when they're blending in this way with their ink. Also, by blending off a lot of your ink onto your messy mat first, it stops that solid circle that comes on, which again is very hard to blend out. And now, unless that's the look that you want, that is very hard to blend out into a smooth blend as well. So always blend onto your messy mat or whatever your sort of spare copy paper first, and then work onto your cardstock, and that's how you can build up the colour really quickly. Then once the majority of the ink has been worked off your sponge, that's when you can come directly into the centre of your cardstock, into the centre of your project, and add that layer, so you take away the whiteness of the card in the centre. Okay, so that's that's how you can work on any sized mat if you want to colour tint it yourself. Okay. So hopefully that helps you a little bit. I know it's a technique that it does take practice, but once you get the feeling for your tools and the ink that you're working with, and just with those few little just hints and tips along the way, you will be able to get yourself a nice blend going on there. And I actually find this really relaxing. I can spend hours doing this and get a little bit lost in it, and then find out I've either added too much ink because I've just really enjoyed the blending. But yeah, I find it actually really therapeutic. That's one of my things I really enjoy. So I'm just going to, no, before I do that, I'm going to come in with the stamp again and do exactly the same with the yellow ink. I don't need to blot off quite so much on the side because just of the colour, the nature of the colour of the ink that I'm using. And just build up that distressed look. And the fact that you're working tone on tone, you can't really overdo it, and you'll be surprised at how well you can create yourself a really distressed background look, and you'll be really pleased with yourself that it will actually look like a nice piece of design paper that you bought. So if you're going to do it, work tone on tone to start with, because what you'll also find is that as the ink dries, all this imaging that you've stamped will just tone down a little bit more and look far more natural. And always stamp so you've got half the stamp off the page and half the stamp onto the cardstock as well. Now this one, you see that I'm actually adding a lot more detail, but because of the yellow, the patterning just sort of works differently. It's just something you'll get the feel of when you're doing that for yourself. Okay, so we have two pieces of design paper there, so I'm just going to set them aside just while I clean up a little bit. Now the ink pretty much dries straight away, but it really doesn't hurt just to leave it to sit for just a minute or two, just to leave it sitting there. It allows the mica to sort of come up to the front as well, particularly when you're using the interference inks. Now all of these techniques can be used with your matte blending, and you can get exactly the same effects as well. Who's that falling asleep for a minute? I hope I'm not boring you there. Dearie me. Or is it just the hypnotic effect of the blending sponge going round and round? I hope so, Janet. Okay, so we've got those. I don't know if you can see on the camera there, but the mica ink, particularly in this one, is really, really pretty. It's got that pink just coming through. So it's a really nice way to use your interference inks, really. So that's product 2 that I've used. Now to come on to stamping into the background with the mandalas. You can stamp on both sides if you want, or you can choose which colour is going to be top or bottom. You can even do the same colour, top and bottom as well. I mean, say it's entirely up to you. But I think I'll stamp onto the yellow. I suppose if I'm using the deck chair, this will be the sand, this will be the sun. Bit of wishful thinking, I know, but look, it's summer. We haven't had much of it, have we? So we get a lot of stamp for our money with this particular set, and I'm going to use the largest of these stamps here. It's half a mandala. If you wanted to stamp this as a whole, it can actually be married up very well, particularly if you're using your stamping platform. So you could stamp the two halves, make sure you line them up nicely together, and they do marry up really well, and you've got yourself a whole mandala. I'm only going to use the half of it. Okay, and here also we have lovely little sentiments, and this would make a really nice stopper for the easel card as well. These, we don't have a die for this particular set, but the sentiments have got a box all the way around them, which makes them really easy to cut out. So I'm not using the stamping platform myself at all this time round. I've got myself an acrylic block. This fits on it perfectly, and I want to stamp this mandala into the corner. I'm not even going to stamp it straight. I could stamp it straight there, but I'm just going to do it off the corner there. That's what I've done on the pink, and I think that just works really nicely. So I shall use the same colour ink as well, the lemon candy. So whichever colour you've done your background in, I would perhaps suggest stamping in the same colour, but you can equally have the same effect if you want to choose a different colour. And if you're just using this as a piece on its own and just using this as a card, if you stamp it in black with one sentiment as well, that would look stunning. It really would. So I've inked that up as I would do any stamp with my interference ink. Before I stamp onto there, I'm going to get rid of a lot of that ink just by stamping and blotting off that ink onto my messy map, because I want this to be like sort of fade into the background. Again, I don't necessarily need a perfect image, so I'm just going to take off a lot of the ink and just line that up there and just give that a good stamp down. Again, if it comes out perfect, then brilliant. If it doesn't come out perfect, then it really doesn't matter, because what I'm creating in the background here is like a distressed piece of design paper, isn't it? So I can stamp that, and there we are. I mean, that's a really nice image there, and it works so well with a distressed background. Now I have a tiny little bit of ink left on that corner of the stamp, and I'm going to make use of that. I'm just going to stamp that into that top corner there. I've done exactly the same on this card, just a tiny piece of the image there. Now this one is slightly smaller, so it will turn out slightly different, but that's absolutely fine. There we are. That just gives a really nice, that's what just gives the random look, which is really what you're trying to achieve with this. Again, I'm just going to clear that up. Okay, so we have our two pieces of design paper, and the colours look really stunning together, don't they? So now we can come to our card blank. So this is the inside, the base of the card here. And I've just cut myself a matten layer. Now I've cut these to be smaller than the base of the cardstock. I didn't use dies. I've just cut them so they're slightly smaller, so then I can mat and layer my coloured piece onto the top like that. So there's no need to sort of give you the measurements for this. It really does depend on the shape and the size of the card blank that you're using. There's nothing to say that you can't change this up, and instead of using the square nesting dies, use the rectangles and work onto a C6 card or a 5x7 card. I think that would work just as well. So now I've used a bit textured cardstock here just to add a little bit of point of difference for my matte and layering, so I can put that on the base, and then I can add my yellow layer. Okay, so just square that up. Okay. Now this top layer here, I'll just show you what I've done with this card. I've basically treated what would be the inside of the card in exactly the same way. So the darker layer here, I've cut myself so it fits on the inside, but I will be cutting that in half in a second. And I also have the white matte layer that will go onto there also. I shall attach that separately and also cut that in half. Again, I don't do any measuring when it comes to this, so I'll show you how I go about doing this. I really, at the moment, just want to cover this top section. So I'm going to put the glue directly onto my card blank and attach the layer like so. Okay. Now, because we have our fold there already and we've only added the glue to the top, it means that this section can come off. So I'm going to use my trimmer and just take that away. Doing it this way, I find that I always get my measurements right. I don't end up being too short. Because if I do it any other way, I always seem to get the measurements wrong, and I end up with something too short and it doesn't fit, and then I get frustrated. So by doing it this way and just trimming to size as I go, I find that to be a lot more effective. You may be a lot more efficient at this. It sounds like we've got a delivery. Hazel's letting us know. I think it's actually, we've got school books coming, so it's nothing really exciting. Okay, so I shall carry on going, and I shall just add this white matten layer in exactly the same way. I hope Hazel will see the delivery guy off in a second. So you can see now that I'm just trimming off this extra section for the white card in exactly the same way as I did before. Now, I'm not going to worry about putting that white section at the bottom there. You possibly could, if you wanted to. That could be the section that you write your greeting on. It's up to you whether you need it or not. I didn't particularly there, so I shall leave that off. Now we can think about putting our blue section on the top. Okay. Again, I'm going to layer this in exactly the same way because I found that it works really well for me. Put the glue directly onto the card, and then we can put our layer on, and we know that we've got exactly the right size that we need. Now you could actually, what might be a nice idea, you could actually leave that layer like that, so then we put on our image at the front. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to trim this, and then I can use this extra piece to actually die cut my sentiment out for the stopper. So I shall cut this again, and this, I say, this technique just works really well for me. I know that everything lines up and everything looks nice and neat. So there we are, we can see it all coming together really nicely, and it will look different to this one actually, which is quite nice. So we've got this, and I'm going to use that to cut my sentiment out in a second. So I have my image. I've used the largest of the nested oval dies to create the frame in the lemon, so that works really well. So I can add my image directly to that, like so. Now I think what I will say, when you add the oval on now, just make sure that you do keep it within the confines of the card, because it would be all too easy to sort of layer it like this, have it off the edge of the card, and then you'll be stuck for an envelope to add it onto. But so I think it really does layer quite nicely. I'm only going to add glue to the top half of the oval there, and just while the card is closed, because obviously this is how it would be sent and posted in the envelope, just layer that oval up like so, and you have that ready now to open up. Just while I'm here, actually, you'll notice the slight difference in the images. In the background here, I actually inked and then just distressed with the stamp in the same way that I did with the backgrounds here on this particular one. I didn't on here, I don't think it needed it, that's entirely up to you. I did do this inking after I'd coloured the image, because I used a lot paler ink than the actual image itself. I don't think it detracted from the colouring at all. So it's entirely up to you as to how you want to do that. So I think all we need to do now is think about our sentiment, which will act as our stopper. So we've used these stamps, so I can use those move those to the bottom. I've used the ovals. I've used the Sugar and Spice collection. So this is actually the Relax and Recharge set. There was a couple in this collection, a couple of sets in this collection, but it's this particular one that I saw on the show. So it comes down to our last set that I challenged myself to use was the Builder Sentiment collection. So you'll see that we have a set of dies. It's just one die to cut out each word. You don't have a mat and layer, but you don't need it, I don't think. And then you also have the stamps. So you have the smaller stamps and you have the larger stamps in a really lovely flowing font. Now, I'm going to stamp the birthday stamp this time. I've used Happy there. I'm going to stamp the birthday, and I want to do this on the bottom half. And I think it's just a really nice way just to keep it all coordinated. You've gone to the bother of inking this part. You could, if you wanted to, add it to the bottom there. I think that would look quite nice. There's options. There's options on how you want to use this. I'm actually going to use it to stamp my sentiments. So I'll get myself a stamping block. That one's not quite big enough. Let's take that stamp off there. So I'll get myself an acrylic block. I'm going to use the VersaFine. So I'll get a really nice dark image. Now, of course, if you're not confident stamping freehand, then you can use your stamping platform for this. I'm going to stamp that there. So we have a little bit of the darker ink and the ombre of the blue, so that should be a nice contrast against the yellow. So we give that a nice stamp. Just let the ink take, so don't whip the stamp off straight away. We'll just let the ink take and transfer. So when you come that way, so yeah, perfect impression, as you always do. I shall get my die that corresponds. And I'll just, and you can see that I've used these sets before, so I've had the advantage of taking the stamps on and off. When you use this for the first time, I would suggest when you take your stamp off the carrier sheet, it will be a little bit tough going just for the first time. So if you do that, just peel the stamp off really gently from the carrier here. It will say it offers a little bit of resistance the first time you use it, but allow the stamp then just to relax back into the shape that it was meant to be, and then you'll find that it fits the die that corresponds to it so much better. Again, I've had the advantage of using these a couple of times over, so they do actually come away from that carrier sheet really quite easier for me now, because they pick up little bits of dust and little bits of lint as well, so it doesn't stop their cling to the acrylic blocks, but it does just aid the removal a little bit for you. So now I can just die cut that and use that. So you can see now actually with the inking, the ombre effect, because of where I've placed that on there, that's really effective. That's what I really wanted to achieve. So now I can use some 3D foam. You want to use 3D foam on this now because you want to create that dimension to act as the stopper for you on your card. Now what I might need to do is just cut those in half a little bit. Just make sure that those pieces are hidden. We don't want those on show really, do we? So I take myself another piece of foam. I do own small scissors. I know if you've watched some of my lives before, I always tend to use the larger scissors, but I do own small scissors. Okay, that's just peeping out. I'm going to be a little bit fussy and make sure that that's hidden. Okay, so I can pull the sheets off like that. Okay, now I think I do want to have that roughly central, but what I'm going to do, I actually want to stamp the happy directly onto the card this time round. Here I stamped it onto a piece of blue, but this time I just want to stamp it in black directly onto the background, so that will be a lot easier to do before I add the birthday. So I'll just put this onto an acrylic block. Ink that up gently. So if we're going to have the birthday about there, I want to put the happy about there. Again, if you're not happy stamping directly onto the background that you've created, do stamp onto another piece of card, because you don't want to risk upsetting yourself by not stamping it properly. So then I can put my birthday there. And that acts as the perfect stopper for your image. So there we have the same style card twice, but they actually both look really very different. Do share your cards into the group as well if you do manage to make them. We'd love to see them. Enjoy your weekend, everyone, and take care. Thank you.